Just to get us started, just a quick introduction to me. I'm Gareth. I present a technology radio program on the BBC World Service. We're called Click, and each week we go on air around the world talking about how technology affects our lives. Anindya, you seem to be a real sort of techno optimist, even though you've now admitted you're over 40, but you remain upbeat, unjaded by the whole thing, optimistic. So what's your view on, this threshold that we're sitting at the moment?
Sure. So I've been a data scientist for about 15 years now, and so I've worked with data all my life. And data and algorithms, you can think of them as two sides of the same coin. Both feed off each other. One of the things that really baffles me, and to some extent even upsets me, is that I've often been part of, whether it's a panel or a TV show, whatever, where people have been fear-mongering, engaging in fear-mongering about all the evils that is coming out of this data-driven society. And I just want us to sort of take a pause and really start questioning that mindset. And this comes from working not just as an academic, but also in the industry in a wide variety of countries and wide variety of sectors, where I've seen the real power and the real benefits to both business and society from the use of data and algorithms. Okay, so whether it's the world of marketing to banking to telecommunications to healthcare. It's been a privilege for me to be in part of these projects where I've seen the real benefits spill over and trickle down to segments of the society, which would not have happened if algorithms and data and analytics were not in place. And like I said, a big part of that has been the advent of mobile devices. So we are often fed on this diet that mobile is out to get us, mobile is stalking us, and companies and organizations are abusing it. It's not really the case. I can rattle off a bunch of different examples, but I just want us to take a pause here and see that organizations are not out to get us. It's a give and take relationship. The more information you share about yourself, the more relevant the offers will come back to you, whether it's an actual product or a service, or it's a benefit such as healthcare, and so on. So that's where I come from. So I really believe in there is a huge upside to the use of data and algorithms and the society that we're headed to, and I'm not at all convinced about a lot of the downsides that are being projected. So this is an important point that you last mentioned, which is alluding to the idea that we are also responsible. So if an algorithm is fallible, is actually making a mistake, I do believe that a part of the responsibility is on us as well, because we are not sharing the information that would actually make the algorithm more accurate. Okay? So the way I look at the world in the next few years is there's going to be a self-selection of people or individuals who would actually partake in that give and take between organizations and themselves, where the more information you have about us, the better your data and algorithms would be in predicting what our preferences are. And this is a two-way process, right? So if you just take the world of advertising, for example, advertising is not going to end anytime soon. So those of us who feel bombarded and annoyed by those ads just keep following you, right? That's not going to go away. So how do you minimize or alleviate that concern? It's where you actually go to take the next step and say, all right, I'm going to actually open up and reveal some information about my preferences so that your algorithm then knows really what I like and what I don't like. And so you don't actually show me those annoying ads anymore. That's an example in the world of business, but similar examples exist in other places too. So I feel that to the world that we're getting into, this is a reciprocity-based relationship between us and organizations for the algorithms to be doing their job more accurately.
The idea that now with data analytics, firms can do effectively experiments on us. They might be anonymized, but they're following us from dawn till dusk, and probably even whilst we're asleep, following our activities, knowing where we go, where we shop, where we interact. And these experiments are successful, and they get better and better at anticipating the demand we may have for their products. And I think in one of your talks, I think I heard you say that some of these very targeted apps can now increase unintended spending by something like 16%. And some people might think, well, that's horrified. The very fact that this is unintended spending, that thanks to these experiments, we're being manipulated into buying things that we never intended to buy.
Right. That never happened before.
Right.
Well, but it's happening even more accurately now, and on the basis of the data that we're handing over through our services, some might say, I don't necessarily believe this.
So I strongly disagree with you pretty much on everything that you said. First of all, it's not unintended. I think I mentioned unplanned. But let's go back to the basics. So I am of the firm belief that experiments are a good thing. They're good for the society, they're good for the business, they're good for the planet, they're good for us. Okay? Why? Because through these experiments, organizations learn more about us, and we reveal our preferences either in a stated way or in a revealed way. And through that process of information exchange, organizations get to know more about you, right? So for example, like the two scenarios like Pedro mentioned before, one in which Google and the users' incentives are allied along with the advertisers, the other in which the marketer is trying to sell you something that you don't want to buy, right? In the second scenario, it happens because the marketer doesn't know about your preferences. So he's like throwing random darts in the black. Well, you can actually alleviate or minimize that by taking that process of getting into that value exchange between the organization and so on, right? Now, in the world of mobile, like I said, we've spent the last few years thinking about how to make the world, the mobile as a butler, but not as a stalker. And it's to basically to help consumers, navigate the process where, we used to live in this, information deficit economy. Now we're in an attention deficit economy because of information overload. So this device and the organizations in the ecosystem, the telecom providers, the brands, the marketers, the app developers, they can actually make this work for you by reducing that information overload and increasing the attention that consumers can actually pay by curating these offers, these products, these services for you, right? So that's where I believe, and again, this isn't just fiction, right? These are all based on hard fact and hard science and hard data analytics in different parts of the world, where we've seen that the same consumer who was being repeatedly hammered with, let's say, irrelevant, annoying offers, once he or she decides to partake in the relationship, it could be something as trivial as, keeping your location on so that, the firm knows where you are at this point. Now, the next few instances of that exchange become far more valuable to the consumer because all of a sudden he's actually getting very relevant offers for products, services, or information. It doesn't always have to be business. It can also be social information-oriented products and services. So that's an example where I believe that mobile and the algorithms that are driving mobile can and are being used to make it more of a butler as opposed to a stalker. So, an example of this is what what Facebook has started doing a couple of months back, which is if you've been all exposed to ads on Facebook that are very annoying and irrelevant, you can change that. From today, you can change that. You can actually log in to your account on Facebook, and there's an option that says, are you seeing irrelevant ads? Are you seeing ads that are uninteresting? And you can go back and change it and actually input your preferences. And then Facebook lets you say, well, you like to climb mountains, so you can see ads only for mountaineering gear. So that's a small but a tiny step that organizations are taking to your point about changing that balance where there is information, there's less of an information asymmetry like Pedro mentioned. And this is an example of what a company can do.
Into the industries that we haven't traditionally thought of being high-tech, data-driven industries. Your take, Anindya?
I would say one of the most fascinating, personally appealing to me is healthcare. So we've been involved in some projects where by integrating data from smartphones and wearable devices, we are trying to optimize, operations in hospitals. So there are two metrics we are trying to achieve. One is how do you minimize waiting time for patients in hospitals, and how do you increase engagement time between patients and doctors and nurses, right? Now, again, this is a question where some of us might feel apprehensive about data from wearable devices and mobile, but we have seen firsthand evidence that this works. By making patients, doctors, and nurses wear wearable devices, we are able to follow the trajectory of their walking patterns, on their normal day-to-day routines, figure out the inefficiencies in their normal schedules, fix them, address them, and then see that the two metrics we care about, increasing engagement time, reducing waiting time, that actually happens.
A lot of the power is in the hands of these really big Silicon Valley multinationals and not in, say, publicly owned corporations or government.
So I'll take a stab at that, right? So I think in my mind, there is a very important distinction between data privacy and data security. Right? So what I mean by that is, sure enough, Google's collecting a lot of data about us, and they're, in my experience and belief, they are actually using it in a way to improve our lives in a wide variety of different applications. What you're also talking about, the risks also come from security. For example, if there are security breaches, if there are people trying to infiltrate the assets of this company, and then pluck out data from that company without the company intending for that to happen, which is the definition of a breach, sure enough, that's a risk. But I also want to make a distinction between, where is that risk coming from also, right? So, since I'm from the US, a story that comes to mind is that of Edward Snowden and the things that he revealed, right? So one of the things he revealed was the NSA, the National Security Agency, was snooping down under the undersea cables that connect US and Europe, from companies like Google and Facebook, and plucking out data without the likes of Eric Schmidt or Sergey Brin or Larry Page knowing anything about that, right? So I think when we talk about risk, we have to make the distinction between where those risks are coming from. And also, are these, when you have data, there are two sides of the same coin, which is there's the privacy aspect, but there's also security. And these risks that we tend to think about, at least in my belief, are far more about security than about Google intentionally violating my privacy or abusing my data. So actually, I'm not sure I entirely follow what you're saying, but are you saying that are consumers willing to use data as a currency, and is the ecosystem gearing up for that sort of mindset, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So,
if we just think of data as currency, yeah.
Sure. Actually, one of the big myths out there that I'm trying to disrupt or get rid of is that we think we care a lot about our data and privacy, but we actually pay lip service to it in reality. In other words, I see far more evidence that consumers in different parts of the world, across different demographics, from different ethnicity levels and so on, are willing to partake in that value-based relationship that I mentioned. So we are increasingly gearing towards that ecosystem where organizations on the other side also realize that there is this value-based system that's been created. So different companies and different startups and different established companies are taking bits and pieces of a different ecosystem. So to your question, whether data would be used as a currency, the answer is yes, it already is being, and it's not just by the millennials. One of the highest adoption rates that I've seen in that value-based exchange comes from the demographic 40 to 54, and the ecosystem is in fact gearing up for that. Yeah. So just building on what Pedro said, right? You mentioned something like, can data be an impediment for innovation, or can data foster innovation, right? Or data concentrated, right? So concentrated data, can it foster innovation or act as an impediment, right? So we know some examples that, Netflix and the Amazons of the world, where clearly they're innovating. Now, when can data actually data concentration become an impediment? So at least from what I have seen in some of the work you've done, that happens if there is a very strong self-selection of a certain kinds of consumers opting into this process. So your entire 100 billion observation data set comes from only 1% of the population that you're trying to serve, right? Then there isn't a whole lot of room for innovation. So this is an example where big data doesn't help innovate, because it's actually representing a very, very small portion of your population. Whereas if the same, same analogy, I get a fraction of the data set, 1 billion observations from maybe a lot more people, then you can actually see more innovation coming out because of the diversity of that. So the answer to when can data concentration actually hamper innovation often depends on the distribution of preferences in your sample.